In the early 1800s, surgery was more like torture than a medical procedure. Pain made anything but the very simplest surgery a terrible agony. Some doctors gave their patients drugs like opium and morphine. To deaden the pain this way during surgery turned out to be in the long run as bad as the pain itself. Many a surgeon caused his patient to become a drug addict. Drugs were too dangerous. Other doctors filled the patients with whiskey in the hope that the patient would pass out. Whiskey did not provide any true insensitivity to pain. Patients sobered up in a hurry once the blade sliced into their flesh. Alcohol did not work. By the start of the 1800s, all of these methods had fallen into disfavor. Instead, doctors performed surgery with the patient fully awake. The skill of a surgeon was measured by how quickly he worked, not by how well he did the job. Operations seldom lasted more than 5 minutes. Most were over in less than 1 minute. A British surgeon routinely took off a leg in a minute or less. One man described such an operation. With one sweep of his knife, the surgeon cut off the limb of his patient, 3 fingers of his assistant, and the coat-tail of a spectator. This story was only a joke, but it pointed out how quickly surgeons worked. The pain was also a burden to kind-hearted doctors. They couldn't face the agony inflicted upon their patients. Many doctors gave up surgery to follow another career. Pain is unpleasant, but it usually serves a purpose. It calls attention to trouble inside your body. Without pain, you could not feel heat, cold, or pressure. You could easily cut yourself and bleed to death without ever feeling anything. One of the problems that lepers face is the loss of sensation. The disease attacks their nerves. Lepers can't feel pain or heat in their hands or fingers. If a leper were to hold a tin cup filled with scalding hot water, he could suffer bad burns and not even be aware of it. Pain during surgery is certainly unwelcome, and some operations can't be rushed. Until the discovery of painkillers, known as anesthetics, in the 1850s, doctors did all operations at breakneck speed. The story of painkillers actually begins with the discovery of gases. The Earth's atmosphere is made of a mixture of gases, mostly oxygen and nitrogen. In the 1700s, chemists discovered other gases like hydrogen and carbon dioxide. Some doctors believed that gases helped their patients. They opened pneumatic hospitals. Pneumatic is a word that means air. Patients came to these hospitals to breathe these new gases. Inhaling various gases was supposed to cure all sorts of diseases. Of course, this treatment was actually worthless. A young man named Humphrey Davy worked in one of these pneumatic hospitals. Humphrey Davy came from a wealthy family, or so he thought. Upon the death of his father, the family fortune turned out to be a huge family debt. Humphrey Davy was a Christian, and he felt it was his duty to make good on the debt. He became an apprentice to an apothecary or druggist, and bit by bit he repaid everyone. Humphrey Davy turned to chemistry full-time in 1797. Dr. Thomas Beddoes hired him to investigate the medical properties of various gases. Davy showed considerable talent in making new gases. Unfortunately, he foolishly breathed each one, nearly killing himself with the poisonous ones. Humphrey Davy's first medical triumph was his discovery of laughing gas. The gas, nitrous oxide, is the chemical combination of 2 nitrogen atoms and 1 oxygen atom. Davy reported that the gas, when breathed, caused him to feel lightheaded. He couldn't control his emotions. He would have a crying binge or a laughing fit. One day his employer called Davy from the laboratory to make medical rounds. Unknown to Dr. Beddoes, Davy had been testing nitrous oxide. As the patients described their various ailments, Davy responded with howls of laughter. Finally, Davy was led out of the hospital, giggling out of control. Davy was the first scientist to give public lectures about his discoveries. Ordinary people could actually learn about science. His lectures included dramatic displays of electricity, exploding gases, and so on. Eventually, he became England's best-known scientist. Unfortunately, his habit of sniffing and tasting new chemicals left him physically disabled. Then, in 1812, an explosion nearly blinded him. His mind was still active, so he hired an assistant named Michael Faraday. Together they continued to make first-rate discoveries. "It appears to me that laughing gas is capable of destroying physical pain," Davy stated. "It overcame a toothache I had. Maybe it can be used during surgical operations." Humphrey Davy was a chemist, not a doctor, so he did nothing else with the new gas. We now know that nitrous oxide alone is not powerful enough to be used for surgery. Most patients still feel some pain. For that reason, Davy's discovery finds its greatest use by dentists who must pull teeth. It is also used in combination with other painkillers. The next step towards painless surgery in England was taken by James Young Simpson. As the seventh son of a poor baker, his future looked bleak. The family decided upon an unusual experiment. They picked the boy with the most promise, James, and put the family savings at his disposal. They believed as he grew older, he could support the others in the family. Young James didn't disappoint them. He started school at age 4, entered medical college at age 14, and became a doctor at age 21. Most doctors practice their profession by repeating unproven remedies. Not Simpson. He studied all areas of medicine. He tested what he studied. Because of his success, he became a professor of medicine at the University of Edinburgh. He peppered his lectures with the latest scientific facts. He encouraged students to use microscopes to examine diseased tissue. This put him at odds with other doctors. Once, Simpson's boss shook his fist at Simpson and shouted, "I don't believe one word of your lecture." In 1846, Simpson read reports of ether being used in America as an anesthetic. He tried it on his patients. He only had limited success. He used sulfuric ether and not the purer form of diethyl ether. Because of impurities, sulfuric ether couldn't be depended on to give uniform results. It didn't work the same from one patient to the next, or even on the same patient from day to day. Also, ether carried a suffocating odor that repelled patients. They struggled against the doctor as he tried to administer the gas. Ether also had the habit of exploding at the slightest spark. Doctors handled it with care, or they blew up the operating room. Because of these dangers, Simpson searched for a replacement. After dozens of trials, he hit upon chloroform. Chloroform is a sweet-smelling, colorless liquid that readily evaporates. Carbon is the main element that makes up coal. Chlorine is one of the elements found in ordinary table salt. Simpson urged other doctors to use chloroform. He held up his hand and ticked off its advantages. 1. Chloroform does not explode or even burn. 2. It works in a predictable way. 3. And best of all, it possesses a rather sweet smell. I can give it to my patients by simply pouring some on a handkerchief and holding it under their noses. Simpson summed up its advantages. Chloroform works faster than ether, and it is easier for the patient to take. Some doctors refuse to use chloroform or any other anesthetic. They believe that pain served a purpose and it was wrong to try to avoid pain. Some clergymen agreed with this view. Those who opposed painkillers fought a hard battle against Simpson. If anyone could answer these objections, it was Simpson. He was not only a doctor, but a scholar. He not only answered the medical objections to anesthesia, but he also justified its use on Christian grounds. God does not rejoice in pain, he said. Queen Victoria showed her support by appointing him as her personal physician. Dr. Simpson's greatest gift to medicine was his fight to make anesthesia an established part of surgery. The use of chloroform, however, turned out to be a dead end. Although chloroform does not burn or explode, the chemical is a poison and may cause cancer. There also are people who may suffer heart attacks when they breathe chloroform. Nitrous oxide and chloroform proved to be false starts on the road to modern painkillers. Success would come in a country that European doctors looked upon as backward and hardly civilized: the young United States. William Thomas Green Morton wanted to be a doctor. As the son of a penniless New England farmer, he couldn't afford medical studies. Instead, he took a course to be a dentist. In 1844, he settled in Boston with his bride, Elizabeth. "I have not given up on a medical degree," he told her. "First, I'll make enough money to build a house for you. Then I'll study medicine." William Morton was able to make a good income right away. He designed a set of false teeth much better than any in use. His dentures required patients to have all of their old teeth taken out. The prospect of such a dreadful experience scared away some of his paying customers. "If only I could pull teeth painlessly," he thought, "I would become the richest doctor in Boston, perhaps in the entire world." He decided to attend medical school to learn how to relieve pain. Morton couldn't wait for the fall term to begin. He wanted to get a head start on his studies, so he hired a doctor to be his tutor. He became the private medical student of Dr. Charles Jackson of Somerset Street. Dr. Jackson was one of the most colorful figures in Boston. He liked fancy clothes, attended parties in extravagant homes, and was a chemist, world traveler, and physician. He was also a non-stop talker. How he talked! He could carry on an intelligent discussion about any subject under the sun. Dr. Jackson's mind bubbled over with ideas. He hopped from one subject to the next. Right now, he was loudly proclaiming to the world that it was he, Dr. Charles Jackson, who had invented the telegraph. "I explained the whole idea to Samuel Morse during a voyage," Jackson said. "Morse is merely a portrait painter." Of course, a half-baked idea and a completed invention are entirely different. The conceited Jackson, however, would not accept the difference. He claimed a half-dozen other ideas, too. The fact remained that few men in the world knew as much about so many different subjects as Jackson. William Morton learned a lot from Dr. Jackson. In the fall of 1844, Morton entered the Harvard Medical School. One day he was led into the operating theater of the Massachusetts General Hospital to watch an amputation. While the surgery was being performed, the screams of the poor victim echoed into the operating theater. Some of the students watched stone-faced. Others turned their eyes away in horror. Until then, William Morton had wanted a way to pull teeth painlessly just to make money. This experience put a whole new light on the matter. He set his sights higher. He wanted to rid operating rooms of the screams of helpless patients. After reading all that he could on the subject, ether stood out as a likely candidate. Ether is a light, flammable liquid that evaporates easily. In the late 1820s, Michael Faraday, Davy's assistant, inhaled small amounts of the vapor and reported the effect. Yet, Morton had already experimented with ether, and the gas didn't seem to work. He decided to try it one more time. He brought up a rubber bag to hold the liquid. He decided to consult Dr. Jackson first. He talked to Dr. Jackson about the possibility of gases that might deaden pain. Ether will do the job, Dr. Jackson said. He recited all the known facts about ether. Morton mentioned that he had tried it once, but it didn't seem to work. You must use pure diethyl ether, Dr. Jackson told him. Buy it from Joseph Burnett. His apothecary is the only one that sells the pure grade. Dr. Jackson examined the rubber bag Morton was about to use. Ether will eat right through rubber, he told him. He gave him a glass jar with a sponge in it to use in its place. William Morton purchased the ether from Burnett's. He tried it out first on his pet dog. After putting the animal to sleep, he pricked it with a needle. The animal did not move. Moments later, the dog awoke, perfectly healthy. For 18 months, William Morton worked and tested ether on animals. Then he tested it on himself. He locked the door, seated himself in a dentist chair, and soaked a handkerchief with ether. He noticed the time and breathed deeply through the handkerchief. He awoke. Once again he checked the time. I was out for 8 minutes, he observed. Now I must try it on a patient. Late on the evening of September 30th, 1846, Morton heard a pounding on his door. By the light streaming through the window, Morton saw the swollen and bandaged face of Eben Frost. "Dr. Morton," Mr. Frost moaned, "you have to pull this tooth. I can't stand the pain of it any longer." Morton examined the man's swollen jaw. "Yes, the tooth has to come out. I will pull it at once." When the patient saw the pliers for pulling the tooth, he changed his mind. "No," he winced. "Oh, I can't bear the toothache or stand the pain of having it pulled. What am I going to do?" Morton comforted the man. "If you are willing, I have something that will put you into a kind of sleep. You'll not feel the extraction at all." Eben Frost nodded. He took the chair. William gave him ether to inhale, and the man fell asleep. William Morton pulled the tooth. When the patient reawakened, he asked, "Well, when are you going to pull my tooth?" "It's out," Morton said. The excited patient confessed, "I didn't feel a thing." Early in October, William went to Dr. John Warren's home. As the head of Massachusetts General Hospital, he was the most respected surgeon in the United States. Morton pleaded for the opportunity to demonstrate painless surgery. "Such preparations have been tried before," Dr. Warren pointed out. "None worked." But almost in a whisper, the doctor added, "Painless surgery is every doctor's dream. I've almost given up hope. Is it possible?" Morton said, "Yes, it will work. I am certain of it." Dr. Warren had to make a difficult choice. The test would be carried out on one of his patients. If the patient died, he would have to answer the critics and be the cause of a death. A lifetime reputation would also be wiped out. It was a difficult choice. Dr. Warren finally nodded. "Yes, we'll give it a try." They set the date for Friday, October 16th, 1846. Morton continued to improve his methods. He believed the glass inhaler would work better if it had 2 openings. He took it to an instrument maker for changes. On the morning of the demonstration, Morton went to pick up his glass inhaler. It wasn't ready yet. Morton waited in a fever of impatience for the final touches to be put on the inhaler. At 10 o'clock, Dr. Warren strode into the operating room. Onlookers had already gathered, students, doctors, and staff members. The patient, a pale and rather frightened Gilbert Abbott, waited. He seemed resigned to whatever fate awaited him. After a while, the spectators grew restless. Several blocks away, William Morton was beside himself with impatience. As the instrument maker examined the glass globe one last time, Morton pulled it from his hands and raced along the streets to the hospital. Dr. Warren looked at the clock. It was 15 minutes after 10. The delay irritated him. He has probably backed out, he thought to himself. Aloud he said, "As Dr. Morton has not arrived, I presume he is otherwise engaged." The spectators laughed. As the spectators laughed, William Morton burst into the operating theater. Puffing and out of breath, he explained the delay. Morton prepared the inhaler. He mixed some perfume with the ether, both to disguise its well-known odor and also to make it easier for the patient to breathe. Morton was overcome with anxiety. What if the patient struggled and fought with the doctor? What if the patient shrieked and tried to jump up? The students would laugh. The doctors would nod knowingly. Catcalls and cries of humbug would bombard his ears. William Morton would be disgraced. He would never be given a second chance. Finally, the patient was strapped into a heavily padded operating chair. The operation would go ahead whether the painkiller worked or not. Morton began to administer the vapor. The patient shuddered a little and fell into a deep sleep. Morton stepped back, bowed to the surgeon, and said, "Your patient is ready, doctor." Dr. Warren took the scalpel, and with the speed of a master surgeon, he cut away the growth. The patient did not stir as the blade cut into his flesh. The doctor sewed up the wound and wiped away the blood. The patient stirred. He awoke. "Did you feel any pain?" Dr. Warren asked. The viewers leaned forward, listening for his reply. The young man spoke in a shaky voice. "No, it didn't hurt at all." Dr. Warren turned to face the silent crowd. He said, "Gentlemen, this is not humbug." The news of Morton's success spread rapidly. Within 2 years, doctors throughout the United States and Europe adopted anesthetics. The face of surgery was changed forever. Dr. Charles Jackson, however, came forward and claimed full credit for the discovery. He engaged in a vicious public battle with Morton over the discovery. Jackson pointed out that he had experimented with ether first, and he had instructed Morton in its use. Morton tried to answer the claims. They fought the matter out in medical journals and in the press. The quarrel so enraged Morton that he abandoned his dentistry practice. For the rest of his life, Morton spent his time, energy, and every penny he could scrape together to support his claim as the discoverer of ether as an anesthetic. England offered Morton a generous prize for his discovery, but Dr. Jackson raised such a fuss that they withdrew the offer. The French Academy of Medicine offered a similar prize, provided that both men share it. Morton refused, however, rather than let Jackson have any of the money. Because of their jealousy and hatred for each other, each man prevented the other from receiving any money. Actually, neither had been the first to use ether for surgery. That honor went to Crawford Long, a Georgia doctor. He had used ether in 1842 while removing a tumor from the neck of a patient. He repeated the experiment 8 more times, but he didn't publicize his methods until 1849. By then, he was only one of many who had claimed to put ether to use for a surgery. In medicine and science, credit is given to the one who perfects an idea and tells others about it, not to the one who has the idea first. Who deserved the credit for the discovery of painless surgery? The Massachusetts General Hospital appointed a commission to investigate the matter. Most of the members of the commission knew Jackson personally. It appeared he would win the case, but the commission ruled that Morton, not Jackson, should be given the credit for painless surgery. The commission's ruling didn't settle the controversy. In July 1868, while riding in a carriage, William Morton happened upon a newspaper account favorable to Jackson. Morton's face grew scarlet. He crumpled the paper in anger, and suddenly he fell unconscious. William Morton suffered a stroke and never recovered. He died a few days later. His wife, Elizabeth, summed it up with the words, "The greatest personal tragedy in my husband's life was his discovery of ether." Ironically, his enemy Jackson suffered a similar fate. One day he was walking through a cemetery in Boston and came across Morton's tombstone. William C. G. Morton, inventor of anesthetic inhalation. Savage jealousy struck Jackson. All of his life, insanity had lingered just below the surface. This time, something in his mind snapped. He read the inscription and went completely mad. They found him in the cemetery, raving at the tombstone. They carried him off to McLean Asylum. He remained there completely insane until his death in 1880. The two men became terrible examples of how personal pride can ruin a person's life. Likely, both Morton and Jackson would have gone on to other discoveries if they had devoted their energy to research rather than controversy. Despite the conflicting claims, one point became clear to the world. The use of ether in surgery was completely American in its origin. The discovery marked one of the first times that the new country had made a major medical breakthrough. It was even an American who invented the term anesthetic. Oliver Wendell Holmes Sr., an American author and physician, was a skilled Boston doctor and the dean of Harvard's medical school. He suggested the term anesthetic for a chemical that renders a person insensitive to pain. He based that name upon a Greek word meaning no feeling. The invention of surgical anesthesia is one of the key discoveries of modern medicine. Today, an anesthetic may be given only by a doctor who has special training in its use. Once the patient is asleep, the anesthesiologist repeats the words first spoken by William Morton. "Your patient is ready, doctor."